Hello everyone, welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this episode, I want to give my thoughts and review on Altered, the new trading card game that is designed by Regis Bonasse and published by Equinox. Now, Regis is, I believe, the founder of Libelud, a board gaming company, and has also published a few board games of his own. And for those who may be coming from more of a trading card game background, I tend to podcast and make videos on tabletop board gaming primarily, although I have dipped my toe into games like Magic and recently Lorcana. And for those who do know board games, Regis has designed games such as Seasons and Dice Forge, and so it's interesting to see another board gaming designer come into the world of TCGs, very similar to Ryan Miller with Lorcana and Richard Garfield, of course, with Magic, and try their hand at a trading card game. Now, I'm not going to go into the rules of gameplay in depth. I will go over a couple of the mechanisms of this trading card game, including both the mechanisms of gameplay as well as the collectability of it. In the background, you'll see some game replays found on Board Game Arena, and I know that there is another website, a fan-made website called X Altered, that offers a similar digital or website-based version for playing this game, and it looks really well and is relatively bug-free, I think. But I am very familiar with Board Game Arena, and it plays very well there too. But to go into what makes this TCG unique for me, and once again from someone who has more of a board gaming background, I like the end game condition of this game. The goal is not simply to have the strongest creatures or monsters on your board and to reduce your opponent's life to 0. The goal is to have these 2 tokens on either side of a central track meet somewhere in the middle. They don't have to be in the very middle, they just have to cross at some point. And they represent your hero and companion, and you start with a hero and companion card that gives you an asymmetric power during the game. And basic gist of this game is to play cards to either side, either your hero side or your companion side. And these cards, I would say these character cards that you play have certain strengths to them. They have abilities, of course, as well. And whoever at the end of a turn has more strength in one of the 3 areas, like the forest, mountain, and water areas, for the sake of simplifying what is happening, if you have more strength than your opponent in a certain area, then you get to advance your token 1 space. And that happens for both areas, and you kind of refresh and redraw for the next round. And whoever has their tokens meet wins. And so gameplay is quick. You can get these games done in about 10 to 15 minutes, in my experience. Who knows if these games can last longer with different decks or different cards. However, I do appreciate how quick these games can be. And I'll get into some game comparisons a little bit later on when comparing them to my experience with other trading card games. So in essence, you are playing an area majority type of battle each round in these 2 different areas, and thus the decisions that you're making on which cards to play have an area majority type of decision to be made. The second thing that I like about this game is how the mana, or the way that you spend mana to play your cards, is determined. At the beginning of the game, you draw 6 cards from your 30-card deck, and you choose 3 of those cards to place into your mana pool. And so you start with 3 mana automatically, and every turn, at the beginning of every turn, you draw 2 cards and may choose 1 to place into your mana pool to increase that by 1. And so you don't have to worry too much about drawing into mana from your deck. it creates the decisions of what cards to keep in hand versus what cards to play into your mana pool to be there permanently to pay for future cards. And so a lot of decisions are placed there, and it seems like you can have multiple copies of certain cards as well. And so the decisions may be a little bit easier to make if you do see, 2 cards in your hand that are the same and you want to get rid of one to place there. But sometimes you have tough decisions to make each turn on which cards you want to get rid of based off of the game state. The third thing are the factions that you have in this game. The way that it works is that there are 6 different factions, or colors, if you will, that you can play from. And once again, you have a 30-card deck of that single color. And of that color, you do, like I mentioned, choose a hero card that gives you an asymmetric power during the game. And so it's relatively straightforward to build a deck, for deck construction before you play a game. Choose a color, choose a hero, and then assemble a 30-card deck. I'm not sure about the limit of certain copies of cards that you may have in this game, but that may tie into the fact that this game, and the fourth point that I want to make is the collectability of this game. From what I've gathered from other reviewers and from what I could read, this game has a very integrated digital and physical nature to it. And so as you collect these cards physically, each card in the bottom right corner has a QR code that you can scan in to keep track of your collection, which is nice. And out of these cards that you collect, if you do lose or trade a card at any time, you may purchase those cards directly from Equinox, I believe, and you can order reprints of those to be sent to you. And it sounds like this will be really important because as you buy booster packs and open up new cards, you can get different versions of the same cards. Very similar, in my experience, with Lorcana and the Enchanted rarity, where you have the same version of a card but with different art. However, in Altered, you may, in addition, have a card with different art, but also with altered or better abilities in the text box. And so the higher rarity cards may be different versions of cards or better versions of cards that you may collect. And it sounds like those may be very unique. And so scanning that card would be important to do so you can say that you have and own that card digitally. And then you can reprint different copies or, multiple copies of that card, and you may trade those as you will, which is fine, but only you have access to that digital version of that card, which is interesting, which may come into play when you play at tournaments. And, if other people have a reprinted version of that card, they may not be able to use that during the tournament, but that's for another topic in another video. I think it's a really interesting approach to collection and making sure that you, one, have the ability to reprint cards and you don't have to hunt for someone else who has the card or a store that has the card. There's a central location that can reprint all the cards that you need. And the collection aspect of it is interesting as well, with the ownership of a digital version or that physical version of a single card. Maybe there are multiple copies of that card in circulation, but the ownership of that is unique to me. So finally, comparing this game to other TCGs and some other board games as well. First of all, comparing it to Lorcana. Lorcana offers a gameplay that is more familiar with games like Magic and other card games that I guess kind of share a similar mechanical approach, which Alter does not do, I think. So I think if you've played a lot of TCGs in the past and are used to games like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, etc., then Altered will feel a lot more different than compared to Lorcana, but they do share the mechanism of choosing cards from your hand, any card from your hand, to place into your quote-unquote mana pool, thus creating the interesting decisions that you have each turn of which cards to keep and play onto your board as characters or which ones to discard to your mana to pay for cards in the future. And that is a mechanism that is often seen in other board games that include deck building as a mechanism, which is distinct from deck construction, which you do in collectible card games. And so it's really nice to see some of those mechanisms that I'm more familiar with board games that include deck construction or deck management and building during the actual board game be somewhat implemented in a trading card game. Another game a card game that I want to compare this to is Marvel Snap. This is another game that I've played a lot of. There aren't a lot of similarities between these games except for the fact that both games offer Altered and Marvel Snap offered a area majority type of experience where you're comparing the strengths of your cards to your opponents to hopefully win one of 2 or 3 areas to win the entire match. And so it's a really nice way. And if you do play a lot of Marvel Snap, then that mechanism will feel very familiar with Altered as well. One board game that I did want to mention that shares this mechanism is War of the Ring, the card game, which was released not too long ago. Every round in that game, you have different locations that pop up from the books and movies, and you're playing cards from your hand to have enough strength to win the majority of that area when comparing it to your opponents. And if you do so, you win that area and have those points given to you, and whoever has the most points wins. But in a sense, this is the same mechanism that is happening in Altered. You're trying to, every round, win the area majority for one of these 2 areas. And so the decisions that you're making include how much do you want to exert and can exert every turn into paying for cards to win certain areas. If you overexert and your opponent has a spell and can remove the characters that you play, then you're in a pickle and you may not only, win that location that round, but may also be in a pinch for the next round because you've overexerted cards and, you lose steam basically. And that same feeling happens in War of the Ring as well, where picking and choosing your battles wisely and allocating your cards in the best way possible is paramount to winning in that game. And so if you've played that game, I feel like Altered would feel very familiar as well. Then finally, Keyforge, another trading card. Well, I guess it's kind of a collectible card game in the sense that the physical versions and the digital aspect of each game they kind of sounded familiar to me, where with Keyforge, you have a randomized pre-printed deck that is given to you that only you own. And so the aspect of Altered where you may acquire rarities of certain cards that only you own as well kind of creates a similar vibe that I had felt when I tried out Keyforge many years ago. And so I think there are a lot of shared aspects among these card games and board games with Altered to kind of create an experience that is familiar to both veteran TCG players as well as board gamers, which is really nice. And then I wanted to quickly touch on the Board Game Arena implementation. And so this, it was a really nice way to learn how to play the game. It's really intuitive, and it gives you at the top bar what actions you may be able to do and highlights which cards you're able to play, which cards you have to discard, etc. And so it's a really good hand-holding way to learn the game as well as to just play it. It is limited, I'm pretty sure, to the demo decks for each of the 6 factions. And it does say with the announcement that you see on Board Game Arena that this is only open to the public until February 4th. In my experience, when this announcement has been made on Board Game Arena, it means that the game after that date will be only available to premium users of Board Game Arena. But what that means is that any any user can play a game on Board Game Arena. If you sign up for an account on BGA, you can play any game. However, premium games need to be created by a user who has a premium account, which is not expensive at all. But I am guessing that Altered will eventually become a premium game that you can play on BGA. And so if you wanted to play a game, you can sign up to be in the queue to wait for someone to create a table for the game, but that creator must be a premium user. I don't know if the ability to implement your own cards into the deck will be made available in the future. In my experience, I think the coding for this type of experience, kind of, constructing your own deck, would be somewhat difficult on the format of Board Game Arena. It's pretty fixed, where the other fan-made sites like Exalted and, for like Pixelborn for Lorcana, it's a little bit easier to do so because it's made to import different decks and use that. And so Board Game Arena, I think in the future, will only have those demo decks available for players to play. And so in the future, if you do want to try the game out, if you happen to learn about Altered after the Kickstarter, then perhaps you can still try it on Board Game Arena and, wait for someone to create a table for you if you're not a premium user yourself. But it would be a good way to try it out and see how it plays. For Exalted, the other websites that may offer gameplay, it may be a little bit looser when it comes to what you can do on your turn, as far as like the step-by-step hand-holding type of instructions that are given to you at the top of the bar. Once again, I have not used Exalted, but from what I can tell, it's pretty good, and perhaps it doesn't allow you to make incorrect moves, of course, and so I think that's got it going for it. But hopefully, a little bit more flexible to allow for deck construction to happen, and for you to import your own decks to try, if you aren't able to do that physically. So, in conclusion, I enjoyed my plays of Altered. I think this is a fun TCG that does feel unique and implements a lot of mechanisms that are found in other TCGs as well as board games. For me personally, I obviously, play a lot of Marvel Snap, and it's easy and quick to play that game digitally. And I'm looking for mostly digital experiences, except when it comes to Lorcana, which I still go to my local game store to play on a regular basis. I think the familiarity with a lot of the mechanisms to other TCGs in the past really, as well as the IP, really hooked me to Lorcana, to the point where I have more of a collection of it physically and have allocated more time and money to it. And so for me, it's difficult financially to think about investing into another TCG at the moment. But I think if you are a fan, maybe you're not a fan of Lorcana for the IP or for the gameplay, but also I think to card game players who enjoy an experience where it's more similar to Keyforge or maybe even Marvel Snap, where the deck construction portion is not as difficult. In Lorcana, you are working with at least 60 cards to create your deck, and it can be a lot of time management and to create a deck for an event, and you spend a lot of time creating a deck and it doesn't work out, then you have to go back to the drawing board, and there's a lot of investment into that. But with Altered, it's pretty straightforward. You choose a color, you choose a hero, and mix and match a few cards to get to 30, and so you're working with half of the cards that Lorcana requires you to work with. And so deck construction will be easier in Altered. And so it's easier to brew a little bit and to come up with a deck that works better for you and for your collection. And so if that appeals to you, then Altered would probably be better. If you enjoy the mechanisms of area majority linked into the things that you often see in a TCG with, card draws card and hand management of what cards to keep in your hand versus what to put as mana, then, and all mixed with area majority, then perhaps Altered is a better fit for you. And it does play relatively quick as well, and so it's got that going for it as well. So those are the thoughts that I had on Altered. I think it is a fun game, and I'm interested to see how well it does in the physical realm, to see if people hook onto it with the collection aspect, and if local game stores start hosting play nights and tournaments and things like that. It'll be really interesting to see how well it does. And I think, in my opinion, like Keyforge, for example, it did have some snafus along the way with the whole, server corruption, and so there's a big halt to the collection of gameplay. But I don't think I really saw, and admittedly, I wasn't into the TCG scene back when Keyforge was out and about at its peak. And so I don't know about the tournament scene and the local playing, the recurrent, weekday, weeknight scene for Keyforge, if that was a thing, and so I do see Altered kind of being very similar to Keyforge in that regard, that the collection aspect, while unique, may not be as hooking for regular TCG players who are collecting Magic cards and Pokemon cards and Lorcana cards and everything. And so we'll have to see, if it does gain enough popularity to become a staple at a lot of local game stores. And as future sets are potentially made and the complexity increases, it'll be interesting to see how interesting the deck construction aspect becomes as well. For me, it does seem pretty straightforward. I do appreciate the streamlined approach to deck construction. However, I really do enjoy the construction aspect of games like Lorcana, which include a lot more flexibility, albeit for a lot more time investment. There is a lot of avenues that you can take with your construction with your deck, to make it either fun or very competitive. And so, yeah, I think that may be missing with Altered, but time will tell. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Altered. Let me know what you think, and thank you for listening or watching this video to the end. Hope you schedule an appointment with us real soon, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.